In the early morning hours of May 20th, 1984, a mysterious envelope appeared on the doorstep of a small house in the rural outskirts of Virginia. Inside that envelope, hidden away for decades, was a set of documents that would shake the foundation of everything we thought we knew about the United States government, UFOs, and the existence of extraterrestrial life. What was inside? The Majestic 12 documents. The very mention of these documents sends a chill down the spine of those who have heard of them, because if they're true, they would confirm what so many have suspected for so long. The government knows far more about UFOs and alien encounters than they've ever let on. But what if the documents were part of something even darker? Something that not only involved our government, but also shadowy figures within it, pulling the strings behind the scenes in a way that no one could have ever imagined? Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like the start of a conspiracy theory or a movie plot. But trust me, what I'm about to show you is no fiction. It's a mystery that's been around for decades, and yet, the answers still remain just out of reach. The Majestic 12 documents are regarded by some as the most significant leak in the history of UFO research, and they've been a topic of intense debate ever since they were allegedly revealed. Did the documents actually come from the highest echelons of the US government? Or are they a sophisticated hoax designed to mislead the public? But more importantly, why have these documents been buried so deeply? Why have they been dismissed, ridiculed, and even destroyed in some cases? But here's the catch. You're not just going to hear about these documents in abstract terms. You're about to uncover the shocking truth behind them, the ones who want to keep them hidden, and the real impact they could have had on our world if they had seen the light of day. Imagine the implications if everything in these documents is true. Picture the idea that alien life, UFOs, and government cover-ups have not only been real but have been intentionally kept from the public for decades. If these documents are real, they could change everything we think we know about our history, our governments, and the very fabric of the universe. And let me ask you, if you were in the position of those in power, would you tell the world the truth, or would you bury it to avoid mass panic, political unrest, and societal upheaval? It's easy to dismiss these documents as another alien conspiracy, just another wild claim by enthusiasts and theorists. But what if the documents were real? What if everything you've been told about UFOs, aliens, and extraterrestrial visitation has been part of a cover-up on a scale far larger than we can comprehend? We're diving into this mystery today, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about the government's involvement with UFOs and the truth of what they've kept hidden from the public for so long. Let's take a step back for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine a world where alien life is not just a possibility, but a reality. Imagine that the US government has not only been aware of this existence, but has been hiding it in plain sight for decades. What would be the reason behind such secrecy? Would they be protecting us from the overwhelming truth? Or is something far more sinister going on? These are the questions that have haunted UFO researchers and truth seekers for years. And the Majestic 12 documents, if they're real, are the key to answering them. What we know is this. In the early 1980s, an individual by the name of William Moore received an anonymous set of documents that purportedly outline the existence of a secretive government group known as Majestic 12. This group, according to the documents, was formed under the orders of President Harry S. Truman in the late 1940s after the infamous Roswell UFO crash. The goal of Majestic 12 was to investigate, manage, and most disturbingly, suppress any knowledge of extraterrestrial contact. If these documents are real, they tell a chilling tale of government cover-ups, secret meetings, and the deliberate withholding of the truth from the American public. But even more disturbing than the content of these documents is the question of how they ended up in the hands of ordinary people like you and me. How did they leak, and why? Was it an act of whistleblowing, or was it a calculated move by someone within the system to ensure that the public would never truly understand the full extent of what's been hidden? We're going to dig deeper into these questions today, breaking down what the Majestic 12 documents reveal, who is behind their creation, and why they've been shrouded in so much secrecy. The deeper we go, the more we'll uncover about the documents themselves, about the people who are still trying to keep them buried, and about the far-reaching implications they hold for everything we thought we knew about UFOs, aliens, and the government's role in this cosmic mystery. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. The Majestic 12 documents aren't the only part of the story. Far from it. There are layers to this mystery that go beyond these documents, layers that have yet to be fully understood, even by the most seasoned UFO researchers. What's the real story behind these secret government meetings? Who were the key players in Majestic 12, and what did they know that we still don't? And most importantly, why are people still trying to cover up the truth, even after all these years? Are we really just pawns in a game that we don't even know we're playing? Or is there something even larger going on, something so immense that it could reshape everything we've ever believed? As you watch this video, remember one thing. The answers you're about to discover might be unsettling, but they're also incredibly important. By the end, you'll know whether or not these documents are genuine, and you'll understand why they matter more than ever. There's no turning back from here, so get ready. The story behind the Majestic 12 documents is more than just a conspiracy theory. It's a secret that could change the world. And as you journey with me through the twists and turns of this incredible tale, you'll see why some believe the government has been hiding the truth from us all along. But here's the catch. Just when you think you're about to uncover the full picture, just when you think the pieces are all falling into place, something else emerges. Something even darker, more chilling, and more far-reaching than you could ever imagine. The truth may be closer than you think, but so is something else, something that threatens not only our understanding of UFOs, but of the world itself. So stay with me. Don't click away. Keep watching until the end, because the truth is about to unfold, and you won't believe what comes next. Continue from where the introduction left off and dive deeper into the mystery. This section should provide background and context about the main characters' recent activities, relationships, and any events that might explain why they are in this situation. Slowly introduce red herrings and potential suspects to keep the audience guessing. Maintain the suspenseful tone and build tension without revealing too much. Keep the wording natural and engaging, ensuring it flows seamlessly. Avoid any headings, one-line statements, or short sentences. Stick to large paragraphs only. Keep the audience hooked by adding more layers of uncertainty. Write the content by targeting US audience. Use the keywords which are trending on YouTube search. As the weeks passed after the first leak of the Majestic 12 documents, the public's interest grew exponentially, but so did the confusion surrounding their authenticity. The debate over whether these documents were real or simply the product of an elaborate hoax intensified. William Moore, the man who had first received the documents, became an unexpected central figure in this growing mystery. A UFO researcher by trade, Moore was no stranger to controversy. He had been involved in the world of alien conspiracies for years, but nothing could have prepared him for the storm that would surround him once the Majestic 12 files hit the public's radar. Soon after receiving the documents, Moore found himself at the center of a web of intrigue, with everyone from government officials to other UFO researchers questioning his motives and his connections. In the beginning, Moore seemed like a credible source. He was an established figure in the UFO research community, respected by many for his work on the subject. He had even co-authored a popular book on the topic, The Roswell Incident, which gained him recognition in the wider world of UFO enthusiasts. But as the Majestic 12 documents began to circulate, cracks in his image began to show. People started to wonder, was he simply the messenger, or was he involved in something more sinister? Some theorists argued that Moore had been deliberately chosen to reveal these documents, that he was, in fact, part of a larger scheme orchestrated by shadowy government agencies to control the narrative surrounding UFOs. There were whispers that he may have been compromised, his reputation manipulated for a purpose he couldn't understand, or perhaps didn't even realize. These whispers only grew louder as Moore's behavior seemed to shift. He became more secretive, more guarded about his sources, and even more distant from those who had once considered him a trusted ally. As the months went by, Moore's life became a constant whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and mysterious encounters. He was no longer just a researcher. He was an unwilling participant in a game far bigger than he could have imagined. His home was broken into several times, his files rifled through, and more than once, he found strange symbols drawn in chalk on his doorstep. But even as he grew more paranoid, Moore couldn't help but feel as though someone powerful, was watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Was this just the paranoia of a man who had opened Pandora's box, or was there truly a force out there intent on keeping the truth about Majestic 12 from the world? But Moore wasn't the only one who seemed to be drawn into this tangled web. Alongside him, there were others, figures in the shadows whose names would remain elusive for years to come. Some of these individuals, who were only vaguely connected to the UFO research community, began to emerge as potential suspects. There was Edward Ruppelt, the former Air Force officer who had once headed the U.S. government's Project Blue Book, a now infamous study into UFOs. Ruppelt had long been a firm believer in the idea that the government was hiding the truth, but did he know more about the Majestic 12 documents than he let on? Then there was Dr. Joseph Farrell, a highly secretive figure with close ties to defense contractors and military insiders. Farrell had made a career of studying hidden government projects and had written extensively on the subject of UFOs and the deep state. Was he simply a conspiracy theorist, or did he know something more didn't? As these characters began to surface, it was clear that something far more complicated than a simple leak was taking place. The Majestic 12 documents weren't just about revealing extraterrestrial contact. They were about controlling information, manipulating narratives, and silencing those who got too close to the truth. But just as Moore and his potential allies tried to dig deeper, they found themselves up against forces that were far more formidable than they had anticipated. There were the obvious players, the government agencies that wanted to keep the secret of UFOs buried at all costs. But there were also darker, more insidious forces at play. Some began to suggest that the documents might not be a government secret at all. Perhaps the Majestic 12 files were part of a deliberate misinformation campaign. The idea was simple: create a false trail, feed it to the public, and watch as everyone raced to uncover the truth. If people believed these documents were authentic, they would spend years chasing ghosts, while those in power could continue to operate under the radar. The more the documents were analyzed, the more questions were raised. Why had they surfaced in the first place? And if they were genuine, why had they been so carefully concealed for so long? As the mystery deepened, new questions began to emerge. Was there someone within the government who had leaked the documents? Or were they part of a much larger plan? Was there an agenda behind the secrecy surrounding Majestic 12, something more than just the desire to control knowledge of UFOs? And perhaps most troubling of all, who else was involved in the cover-up, and what lengths would they go to in order to keep the truth hidden? At this point, Moore found himself alone in his pursuit of answers. His former colleagues began to distance themselves from him, unsure of whether he was truly the innocent researcher he claimed to be, or if he had become an unwitting pawn in a much larger game. But there was one person who stood by his side, a journalist named Linda Moulton Howe, who had covered numerous high-profile UFO cases. Howe had a reputation for digging deep into controversial stories, and she quickly became one of Moore's most trusted allies. Together, they began to investigate the true origins of the Majestic 12 documents, following leads that seemed to go nowhere, but always with the lingering sense that something more was waiting just beyond the horizon. It became clear that the truth they sought was not going to be easy to uncover, and the deeper they dug, the more dangerous their search would become. But even as Moore and Howe pressed on, strange things began to happen. Unexplainable events, such as odd messages left on their answering machines and mysterious packages arriving at their doorsteps, seemed to indicate that someone or something was watching their every move. It was almost as if they were being nudged down a path they didn't want to follow, a path that was leading them closer and closer to something they may not be able to comprehend. And then, one day, it happened. The documents they had been chasing for so long, the ones that had driven them into this world of secrets and shadows, suddenly disappeared. There was no warning, no indication of what had happened. One moment, Moore had the documents in his possession, and the next, they were gone. The only trace left behind was a single, cryptic note. It was brief, written in a hurried, scrawled hand, but it sent a chill down Moore's spine when he read it. "The truth is not for you. Go no further. What did this note mean? Who had taken the documents and why? Was it a warning, or was it a final attempt to silence Moore and how before they could expose the secrets of Majestic 12 once and for all? With the documents missing and their investigation seemingly at a dead end, Moore and Howe had no choice but to ask themselves, had they been played from the very beginning? Had they been led on a wild goose chase? Or was there a greater, more insidious truth waiting to be uncovered? As the pieces of the puzzle began to fade, the question that remained was clear. Who really held the keys to the truth, and would they ever let it be known? As the search for the Majestic 12 documents continued to spiral into chaos, Moore and Howe began to feel the pressure building. It wasn't just the loss of the documents that unnerved them. It was the overwhelming sense that someone or something was actively trying to prevent them from uncovering the truth. They had been carefully following the crumbs of a trail that seemed to always lead them further into a maze of dead ends, but now they couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. They were being watched, monitored, and the people around them were growing increasingly suspicious. The deeper they dug, the more it seemed like they were entering a world where nothing was as it appeared and no one could be trusted. And yet, despite everything, they couldn't stop. There was something irresistible about the mystery, the pull of the unknown that kept them going, even as it grew more dangerous with every passing day. It all started with a visit to a former government official who had allegedly been involved in the early stages of the UFO cover-up. This man, an ex-military officer named George Fields, had spent years trying to distance himself from the world of UFOs and government secrecy, but Moore and Howe had been tipped off that he had first-hand knowledge of the Majestic 12 files. After weeks of painstaking efforts, they finally managed to arrange a meeting with him, hoping to extract the answers they so desperately needed. But when they arrived at his office, they were greeted with a disturbing sight. Fields' office was ransacked, papers strewn across the floor, books tossed aside. It was as though someone had been looking for something, and in that moment, Moore and Howe realized that the very person they had hoped to trust might be just as deep in the conspiracy as everyone else. Fields was nowhere to be found. His phone had been disconnected, and his neighbors reported that he had suddenly left town without a trace. The only clue that remained was an unsettling voicemail message that Fields had left for Moore the day before. In the message, his voice sounded strained, almost as if he were under duress. "If you're hearing this," he said, "it's too late. They know you're coming. Get out while you still can, or you'll regret it." The message cut off abruptly, leaving Moore and Howe to wonder who they were and what Fields had been trying to warn them about. It was as though a vital piece of their investigation had just slipped away into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. Frustration and fear began to mount, but they refused to back down. They pressed forward, determined to uncover what Fields knew and why he had disappeared. But as they dug deeper into his past, things began to take an even darker turn. They discovered that Fields hadn't always been the trustworthy insider he appeared to be. In fact, there were whispers that he had betrayed other whistleblowers in the past, feeding information to government officials in exchange for his own safety. Was Fields truly the victim of some larger, more sinister force, or had he been complicit in covering up the truth all along? Moore couldn't help but wonder if their ally had been playing them from the very beginning, manipulating them into chasing a false lead. As if to reinforce their doubts, an anonymous tip came in, another breadcrumb in the ever-expanding mystery. The message, left on Moore's answering machine, was brief but chilling. "Stop now, or you'll never see the truth. The Majestic 12 are watching." The voice was cold, robotic, but unmistakably threatening. They had been warned before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a threat to stop looking for the truth. It felt like a warning that something far more dangerous was on the horizon. It wasn't long before the first physical sign of danger appeared. Moore and Howe received a package at their office, a nondescript brown envelope with no return address. Inside, they found a photograph, one that would haunt them both for the rest of their lives. The photo showed Moore himself, sitting in his car, parked outside a cafe. But the most chilling detail was that the photo had been taken only moments before he had entered the cafe that morning. It was as though someone had been watching him every step of the way. A small, neatly folded note accompanied the photograph. It read simply, "You're too close. Step back now, or the consequences will be more than you can handle." Who was behind these threats? Were they just anonymous trolls trying to frighten them, or was there a much darker force at play? Something that knew exactly where they were, what they were doing, and how to intimidate them into submission. As Moore stared at the photo, the weight of the situation began to sink in. This was no longer just a story about government secrets, it was about survival. The deeper they delved into the mystery of the Majestic 12 documents, the more they realized that they might be playing a dangerous game with forces far more powerful than they could have ever anticipated. But even as they tried to make sense of the situation, another shocking twist hit them. Someone they had trusted, someone who had been with them every step of the way, was suddenly acting strangely. Linda Moulton Howe, the very journalist who had been helping Moore, started to withdraw. At first, it seemed like simple exhaustion from the endless research and sleepless nights. But then Moore noticed something that made his blood run cold. Howe had been receiving strange phone calls, ones that she would quickly hang up on whenever Moore was nearby. There were also reports that she had been meeting with people Moore didn't recognize, and her behavior had become increasingly erratic. Was she under pressure from someone else? Had she been compromised by the very forces they were investigating? Or was she perhaps the one pulling the strings all along? Moore didn't know who to trust anymore. The lines between ally and enemy had become blurred beyond recognition. In the midst of this growing tension, Moore received an unexpected visitor, a man who claimed to have critical information about the Majestic 12. The man, who called himself Agent X, wore a black suit and spoke in hushed tones, as if he were afraid to be overheard. He told Moore and Howe that the documents they were chasing weren't just a government cover-up. They were part of a larger, more complex operation that had been in motion for decades. According to Agent X, the Majestic 12 were not only responsible for hiding UFO evidence, but were also involved in covert operations that spanned the globe. The man claimed to know the true identity of the mysterious 12 and the shocking reason why they had stayed hidden for so long. But just as Moore was about to ask for more details, Agent X vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic message: "You've seen too much. Don't come looking for me." As Moore and Howe sat in stunned silence, the weight of the situation began to settle in. Every lead, every piece of evidence, seemed to vanish into thin air. The deeper they dug, the more the world around them seemed to collapse, leaving them unsure of what was real and what was manufactured to keep them from the truth. With their investigation falling apart and their trust in one another beginning to crack, the ultimate question remained: who was really pulling the strings behind Majestic 12, and what were they willing to do to keep the secrets buried? And as Moore sat there, a sinking feeling in his chest, he couldn't help but wonder, had they been chasing the truth all along, or were they being led down a path of destruction that would only end in tragedy? As Moore and Howe continued to spiral deeper into the labyrinth of secrecy and deception surrounding the Majestic 12, they could feel the walls pressing in on them from all sides. Just when they thought they were inching closer to the truth, something happened that would shake everything they thought they knew. It started innocuously enough. Moore received an unexpected phone call late one night, a call that, at first, seemed like just another obscure lead or an attempt to mislead him. But as the voice on the other end spoke, something about the tone sent a chill down his spine. The caller, who refused to identify themselves, simply said, "You're not the only one looking for the truth." Then, the line went dead. A momentary silence stretched, leaving Moore with the unmistakable feeling that this was no ordinary phone call, no random tip. This felt personal, and it made his blood run cold. Was someone else hunting the same elusive information? Had they been followed? Who else knew what Moore and Howe were digging into? The call came just days after Moore had noticed Howe's strange behavior, her secretive phone calls, her increasingly erratic demeanor, and her growing distance from the investigation. She had been more than just a journalist. She had become Moore's closest ally in this pursuit. But now, he began to question everything about her. Was she a victim, just like him, caught in a web of lies spun by powerful figures? Or was she playing a much darker game, manipulating more to further some hidden agenda? The doubt gnawed at him. As he tried to clear his mind, he couldn't escape the feeling that someone else, maybe even someone they trusted, was orchestrating a much larger game. Things took a turn for the worse when another person connected to Moore's past entered the picture, someone he hadn't thought about in years, his ex-wife, Sarah. She had been out of the picture for a while, their marriage falling apart long before he had ever embarked on this journey. The tension had been palpable, and their relationship had ended in bitterness and distrust. But out of the blue, she showed up at Moore's apartment one evening, knocking on his door with an urgency in her eyes. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Sarah walked straight in, her face pale, eyes wide with fear, as though she had just been through something unimaginable. "You're in too deep," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Moore could barely process her words before she continued. "They've been watching me, watching us more. I think they know everything. I think they're coming for you." He tried to keep calm, asking her what she meant, but Sarah wasn't making sense. She told him that she had received a message, similar to the one Moore had gotten, warning her to stop looking into the Majestic 12, and that people from her past were now coming out of the woodwork, people she had never expected to be involved in this nightmare. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her hands shaking as she spoke. "You don't understand, Moore," she said, her voice cracking. "They know about us. About you. Everything you've been digging into, it's not just a conspiracy. There's a reason no one has ever been able to uncover the truth. There's something much bigger at play here than you could ever imagine." Moore was at a loss. Sarah, once a skeptical voice in his life, had always dismissed his obsession with the truth, calling it paranoia, making their marriage impossible. But now, she seemed to be saying the same thing he had been suspecting all along, that there was something darker at play, something bigger than he could handle alone. Yet, there was something unsettling about the way she spoke, something in her eyes that didn't sit right with Moore. He couldn't ignore the possibility that she, too, had become a pawn in a much larger game. Was she telling the truth, or was she simply playing into the hands of those trying to manipulate him? Then, as if things weren't complicated enough, another strange development occurred that would shatter everything Moore thought he knew. A new document surfaced, one that contradicted everything they had uncovered about the Majestic 12 and its supposed involvement in UFO cover-ups. This document, however, wasn't a government memo or a military report. It was a private journal entry, written by someone who claimed to have been part of the original Majestic 12 group. The writer's name was redacted, but the contents of the journal were chilling. The entry claimed that the Majestic 12 were not the secretive, shadowy group pulling the strings behind UFO cover-ups, as Moore and Howe had believed. In fact, the writer revealed that there was a second, even more secretive organization that had been manipulating the Majestic 12 from the shadows. This new group, known only as the Black Sun, had been controlling the flow of information about UFOs and extraterrestrial life for decades, making the Majestic 12 nothing more than a facade, a decoy to distract the public from the real players. This revelation left Moore stunned. If the Majestic 12 were just pawns in a larger game, then everything he had been chasing, everything he thought he knew, was built on a lie. The pieces of the puzzle were no longer fitting together, and Moore felt the weight of uncertainty crashing down on him. How could he trust the documents he had already uncovered? Was everything part of a larger plan to mislead and confuse him? The more he looked into this Black Sun, the more bizarre and impossible it seemed to be. Were these the real puppet masters? And if so, who else was involved? As Moore tried to process this new information, the pressure continued to mount. The threats against him became more direct, more personal. He began noticing unfamiliar cars parked outside his apartment, strange men in dark suits who seemed to follow his every move. Every conversation felt like a potential leak, every glance a hidden message. It was as though the walls were closing in from all sides, and no one, not even those he thought he could trust, was immune. Could the mysterious Agent X they had met earlier have been trying to warn them about this very organization? Was the disappearance of Fields somehow tied to this new, far-reaching conspiracy? And then, just when Moore thought he might be able to make sense of the chaos, an unexpected event sent everything spiraling once more. Hal, who had been acting increasingly distant, disappeared without a trace. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. Her office was found in disarray, her phone was turned off, and the last message she had sent to Moore was cryptic at best. "Don't trust anyone. Not even me." Now, Moore was alone in a tangled web of lies and betrayals, unsure who he could turn to or what to believe. Every lead seemed to spiral into a dead end, and every answer only raised more questions. The deeper Moore went, the more he realized that he was not just chasing the truth about UFOs and government conspiracies. He was racing against time, desperately trying to figure out who he could trust, and, most importantly, who might be pulling the strings. As he stared at the jumbled pieces of his investigation, it was clear that the stakes had never been higher. But who is truly behind the veil of secrecy? And what would they do to keep their dark truth from ever seeing the light? As the days stretched on, Moore couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The more he dug into the Majestic 12 and the tangled web of secrecy around it, the more the shadows seemed to close in around him. What started as a distant feeling of being watched became an unmistakable, all-encompassing presence. It was no longer just a vague sensation. He was being followed. At first, it was subtle. A car that seemed to appear just as he pulled out of his driveway. A figure in a dark hoodie walking too closely behind him when he went to the coffee shop. But as the days went on, the pattern became undeniable. No matter where he went, there was someone there, always lingering just on the edge of his vision, always just out of reach. One afternoon, Moore decided to confront the situation head-on. He drove to a local park, parked far from the main entrance, and waited. For hours, he sat in his car, watching the entrance, his eyes scanning every car that passed. He was determined to catch whoever was tailing him, to finally end this endless game of cat and mouse. But as the hours passed and the park emptied, Moore began to feel the heavy weight of isolation settle in. The quiet, the stillness, it was almost suffocating. It was then, just as he was about to give up and leave, that he saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching him from a distance. His heart pounded in his chest as he locked eyes with the person. For a moment, it was as if time stood still. There was a brief exchange, no words, just an eerie, unsettling stare, before the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows. Moore's instincts screamed at him to leave, to get out of there, but his feet felt frozen to the floor. This wasn't just a random person. This was the person who had been tailing him, the one who had been lurking at the edges of his life for days, maybe even weeks. But who were they? And what did they want from him? The next few days were a blur. Paranoia had a firm grip on Moore, clouding his every thought. Every knock on the door sent his pulse racing. Every strange phone call made his stomach twist in knots. But it wasn't until a late-night phone call that things took an even darker turn. The voice on the other end of the line was barely audible, a low whisper that sent a shiver down Moore's spine. "You're not safe," the voice rasped. "Stop digging, or you won't make it out alive. We're watching." Then, just like that, the call ended. Moore's heart raced as he stared at the phone in disbelief. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a coincidence. Whoever was behind this knew exactly who he was, knew what he was investigating. And they weren't just threatening him. They were making it clear that there would be consequences for continuing his search for the truth. His mind spun as he tried to process the weight of the threat. Who had the power to make a threat like that? Who had the ability to follow him, to infiltrate his life, to get so close without ever being detected? The next morning, as Moore tried to calm his nerves, he received a call that would change everything. It was from Sarah, his ex-wife. Her voice was frantic, barely recognizable as she stumbled through the words, each one tinged with fear and urgency. "Moore, they've taken him. They've taken Jason." Moore's stomach dropped. Jason was Sarah's new partner, a man Moore had never trusted, but who had always seemed harmless enough. What did he have to do with any of this? Sarah's voice cracked as she continued, "I don't know what to do. I think they've been watching him too. I think they've been watching all of us." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Who had taken Jason? What did it mean that Sarah was now in danger? 2. Moore's mind raced. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about everyone he cared about. He had thought he could control the situation, thought he could keep this investigation under wraps, but now, with Sarah's call, he realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. If they were willing to abduct someone close to him, how far were they willing to go? Were they capable of worse? Moore's thoughts spiraled as the weight of his choices settled in. He had pushed too far. He had gone too deep into the conspiracy, into the secrets that others had worked so hard to keep buried. And now, it seemed, there was no way out. The phone call had shattered whatever illusion of safety he had left. Whoever was behind this, whether it was the government, a secret group, or something even more sinister, had shown their hand. They weren't playing around anymore. And the worst part? He had no idea who could be trusted. Not Sarah. Not Hal. Not anyone. It was as if he was the only one left in the dark, surrounded by enemies, with no clear path forward. He tried to call Hal, desperate for some kind of answer, but her phone went straight to voicemail. When he tried again, it went to voicemail again. Something wasn't right. This was the woman he had worked with, the person who had helped him uncover the truth about the Majestic 12. But now, her sudden disappearance felt like another piece of the puzzle, another mystery in a growing stack of unanswered questions. Had she been part of this all along? Was she in danger, too? Or had she simply vanished, a casualty in a game much larger than anyone had anticipated? The paranoia and fear consumed him, clouding every decision he made. Moore was caught in a dangerous web of deceit, where no one was safe, and the truth seemed farther out of reach with each passing moment. With no allies, no answers, and no clear direction, he was left with nothing but the cold certainty that he was in over his head. Someone was watching him, someone was pulling the strings, and every step he took seemed to lead him deeper into the shadows. But who were they? And what did they want? Moore could feel the weight of the threat bearing down on him, the walls closing in with an unbearable pressure. His every move felt like a step closer to something worse, something far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. He had no choice but to continue, to push forward into the unknown. But as the dark force behind the conspiracy began to tighten its grip, he realized with a sinking heart that he may have already crossed a point of no return. He was no longer just a man seeking answers. He was a man running for his life, and the people who held the keys to the truth were willing to do anything to keep it locked away. Just when Moore thought the walls had closed incompletely, when he was certain that every step he took was leading him further down a path with no return, something unexpected happened that shook him to his core. He was sitting alone in his dimly lit office, the weight of sleepless nights pressing down on him as he sifted through the pages of his notes. The sound of the fan hummed in the background, the only sound in the otherwise silent room. Moore had been staring at the same document for hours, a piece of a memo he had uncovered about the Majestic 12, a cryptic note that had never quite made sense. It was a scribbled line, tucked in the margin of a government report, one that read, Subject: Final transmission, May 7, 1967. He had passed over it before, chalking it up to some government jargon, another dead end in the tangled mess of his investigation. But this time, something about it felt different. He couldn't explain it, but there was a pull, a nagging sensation in his gut that told him he was missing something, something important. As his eyes scanned the phrase again, a realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. The date. May 7th, 1967. It was significant. Why? He had seen it somewhere before, buried in a forgotten file he'd nearly discarded. His mind raced back to the few loose documents he had gathered on a man named Richard Howe, the very same Howe who had disappeared after their last phone call. Moore had been so focused on the conspiracy on Majestic 12 that he'd missed the crucial connection. Howe had been obsessed with this date, had mentioned it in passing. The event of May 7th, he'd called it. But what event? And why did it matter now? That's when it hit him. Howe was more than just an ally. He was a key player in this whole scheme. A man with more knowledge, more secrets than Moore had ever imagined. But there was more, far more, than just Howe's sudden shift. As Moore leaned in closer to the documents in front of him, something else caught his eye: an email. The sender, Sarah, his ex-wife. He hadn't heard from her since the frantic call about Jason's abduction. He clicked it open, his hands shaking as the words scrolled across the screen. I know you're still looking into the Majestic 12, but there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. The truth is much darker than you realize. The man who's been following you, he's not just working for the government. He's working for me. Moore's blood ran cold. His mind couldn't grasp the words fast enough. Sarah? She had been involved all along? His thoughts spiraled as he tried to process the revelation. How could this be? His own ex-wife, the woman who had once been by his side, the mother of his children, was part of the very web of deceit he had been uncovering? How had he missed this? How had he trusted her? As Moore sat there, stunned by the gravity of Sarah's words, a sudden knock on the door jolted him out of his thoughts. His heart raced. Who could it be? He wasn't expecting anyone. He moved cautiously toward the door, his breath shallow, unsure whether he was about to face the unknown threat that had stalked him for weeks, or if it was someone who could help him make sense of the chaos. He opened the door slowly, only to find someone standing there who he had never expected to see. It was Sarah. Her eyes were wide with fear, her face pale, as though she had just walked out of a nightmare. But the thing that made Moore's stomach drop was what she was holding in her hands: a file. A thick manila envelope, sealed with a wax stamp that looked far too official to be a coincidence. Her voice trembled as she spoke, barely above a whisper. I never wanted you to know this, but you need to understand. The Majestic 12 isn't just a government operation. It's bigger. So much bigger. And I've been working for them, Moore. Not just for the money. For the truth. The real truth. Moore's mind raced, his thoughts colliding in a whirlwind. He wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but all he could do was stare at the envelope. Something inside it was calling to him. He could feel it. Something that would change everything. With a shaking hand, Sarah passed the envelope over to him, her eyes filled with regret. You're in danger, Moore. They've been watching you, not just because of what you know, but because of what you can uncover. This, she pointed to the envelope, this is what they don't want you to find. You're not just up against a secret government operation. You're up against something far more powerful. And if you continue, they won't stop until you're gone. Moore felt the weight of her words sink into him like a cold stone. He was no longer just investigating a shadowy government conspiracy. He was in the center of something far darker, something that reached far beyond what he had ever imagined. The question that had haunted him, what was Majestic 12 really, now seemed trivial compared to the revelation Sarah had just dropped into his lap. This wasn't just about aliens or UFOs anymore. This was about control, manipulation, and an unseen hand guiding the course of history. But as Moore stared at the envelope in his hands, he realized something else. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. The more he learned, the deeper he would have to go. The truth was out there, but the cost of uncovering it might be more than he could bear. Sarah's betrayal, Howe's disappearance, the mysterious messages, it all fit together now. The pieces were coming together, but they were leading him to a place where no one could hear his screams. The next move would be his. But the more Moore thought about it, the more he realized the truth he was seeking might be far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. The following days felt like a blur of tension and uncertainty as Moore grappled with the bombshell that Sarah had dropped into his lap. Every moment, every glance, seemed to carry an underlying current of danger, pulling him deeper into a web of secrecy and lies that he no longer fully understood. The weight of what he had uncovered, his ex-wife's involvement in something much darker than he could ever have imagined, pressed on him like a constant, suffocating force. The envelope she had handed him remained untouched, sitting like a ticking time bomb on his desk, as if it was daring him to open it and face the truth, yet simultaneously warning him that whatever lay inside could destroy everything. Sarah's warning echoed in his mind. If you continue, they won't stop until you're gone. The words were still fresh, still raw. Was it a genuine warning or just a manipulative tactic to keep him from digging deeper? She was scared. Moore had seen that fear in her eyes, The same fear he'd once seen in his children's faces when they were caught in a lie too big to cover up.
But fear could be deceptive.
The line between trust and betrayal had never been blurrier, and Moore found himself teetering on the edge of a precipice, unsure which way to jump. He knew he had to make a choice. But the problem was, the choice was impossible. He couldn't just let it all go. The Majestic 12, the government cover-ups, the strange symbols and encrypted messages. There were too many unanswered questions. The truth was within his reach, but the closer he got, the more it seemed like the universe itself was conspiring to pull him back. There was no turning away now, not after everything he'd seen and heard. The people involved, people he thought he could trust, were more dangerous than he had ever imagined. But at the same time, Moore couldn't ignore the growing fear that had settled in his gut. The cryptic phone calls, the eerie messages, this strange man who had been following him for days, it all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. He was in over his head, and there was no safe way out. Whoever was behind this, whoever had orchestrated the web of lies and deceit, had no intention of letting him expose the truth. They had the power, the resources, and the determination to stop him at any cost. And as the danger grew more real, more palpable with every passing hour, Moore had to ask himself, was the truth worth his life? It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his family.
His children.
The people he cared about. If he kept pushing forward, what would happen to them? What if Sarah's warning wasn't a threat but a desperate plea to keep him safe from forces he couldn't begin to comprehend? She had been involved in all of this from the start, and now that he was in too deep, he couldn't help but wonder, had she been trying to protect him all along? Or was she simply a pawn in a far bigger game? The conflict came to a head the night Moore received another call. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was Howe's voice on the other end, sounding more frantic than Moore had ever heard him. Listen to me, Moore. You have to stop. You're too close. It's not just about the Majestic 12 anymore. They're already watching you. I don't know how much longer I can keep you safe. You need to walk away from this, now. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. Moore felt a chill creep down his spine as he gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean, Howe? What do you know that I don't? There was a long pause, the kind that spoke volumes. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Howe said, the people you think you can trust, they've been playing you. You've been too focused on the documents, on the shadows. But the real danger is much closer than you realize. Your life, your family's life, it's already in their hands. Before Moore could respond, the line went dead. He slammed the phone down, his mind racing.
Who was Howe really?
Had everything he'd said been another lie, another manipulation to keep him from finding the truth? Or was there something else at play here? Something he hadn't seen? His thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock on the door. Moore froze. There was no way he was expecting anyone at this hour, especially after the last few days. He glanced at the clock, 2:30 a.m. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved toward the door, but before he could even reach for the handle, it creaked open slightly on its own. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Someone was inside. The door had been unlocked. The room felt colder now, as if the walls themselves were closing in. His pulse quickened, and his mind raced. Had they found him? Was this it? He had no way of knowing, but the sudden wave of dread that washed over him left no room for doubt. This wasn't just about secrets anymore. This was a fight for survival. He turned slowly, almost afraid to look, but when he saw the figure standing in the shadows, he nearly collapsed. It was Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something darker. In her hands, she held the manila envelope, the one she had given him only hours before, but now it was sealed shut. Moore, you need to listen to me, she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. You've gone too far. You don't understand what you're dealing with. They'll kill you if they have to. Sarah, what the hell is going on? Moore demanded, taking a step forward. What's in that envelope? What are you really involved in? She hesitated, glancing down at the envelope in her hands, then back up at him. There was a moment of silence before she spoke again, her voice barely audible. I didn't want you to know. But I can't protect you anymore. They're coming for you, Moore. And I can't stop them. Moore's mind reeled as everything began to crash together. The warnings, the threats, the strange behavior of those around him. His ex-wife, Hal's cryptic messages, the government documents. All of it was suddenly more real, more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Then why are you here? Moore's voice cracked, the desperation rising in him. Why don't you just tell me the truth? She looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. Because you won't like the truth. You won't like what you find. And once you know, there's no going back. The only choice left is whether you want to live to see tomorrow. The room seemed to close in on him as Moore took a step back, torn between the truth he so desperately needed and the safety he feared was slipping away. His options were dwindling, and with each passing second, it felt like the clock was ticking louder, counting down to something inevitable, something he couldn't control. He was running out of time, and he knew, in that moment, the next decision he made might be the one that would change everything forever. The tension in the room was palpable as Moore stared at Sarah, his mind racing, struggling to make sense of her words. Every part of him screamed to push for answers, to demand the truth, but something in her eyes told him that this wasn't the time to force her. She was scared, more scared than he had ever seen her. And yet, in the depths of that fear, Moore felt a terrifying realization settle in. This was much bigger than he had ever imagined, much more dangerous than the documents or the mysterious government files he had been chasing for months. This was a game played by people who operated in the shadows, who had far more power than anyone could have guessed, and the truth wasn't just hidden. It was carefully guarded, fiercely protected by a network of people who would stop at nothing to keep it buried. I thought I could protect you, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking as she placed the sealed envelope in his hands. But I was wrong. This isn't just about you. They've been watching us for years, Moore. Everything you've uncovered, every step you've taken toward the truth, it's all been part of their plan. Moore's grip tightened around the envelope, and his heart pounded in his chest. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. The conspiracy that had been unraveling before him wasn't a government cover-up of UFOs and extraterrestrial life. It was a carefully orchestrated operation spanning decades, involving more people than he could count, people he had trusted, people who had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes. He wasn't just a target anymore. He was a pawn in a game that he couldn't even begin to understand. His mind raced as he thought back to the moments leading up to this point, the late-night calls, the strange meetings with Hal, the cryptic messages that always seemed to be a step ahead of him. They hadn't been random. They had been orchestrated. Every move, every piece of information, had been carefully placed to lead him to this moment, to make him believe that he was on the verge of uncovering the truth. But the truth was something far more sinister. It wasn't about UFOs or extraterrestrial life. It was about control.
Power.
A global conspiracy that spanned the highest levels of government, military, and intelligence agencies. Moore's mind swirled with the weight of it all as Sarah's words sank in. They've been using you, Moore. They've been using all of us. The Majestic 12 isn't just a secret group trying to hide the truth about UFOs. It's a front, a cover for something far worse. They've been manipulating people, controlling governments, pulling strings behind the scenes for decades. And they'll do anything to keep their secrets safe. Who's behind this? Moore's voice was hoarse, his heart racing as the magnitude of what he was hearing began to hit him. Who's pulling the strings? Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I don't know, Moore. But I've seen the faces, the names. They've infiltrated everything. The people you think you can trust, they're not who they say they are. They've been watching you, listening to you. They know everything. The words hit Moore like a physical blow. He thought about Hal, about his ex-wife, about everyone who had seemed to be on his side, guiding him toward the truth. What if they were all just part of the game? What if they had been leading him down this dangerous path to push him further into their control? He had trusted Hal, he had trusted Sarah, and now, the reality of the situation was crashing down on him with full force. The betrayal was overwhelming, but it was the danger that truly shook him to his core. Before he could respond, The sound of footsteps echoed outside the room, the sound of boots on the pavement outside his apartment. A soft knock at the door followed, too quiet, too deliberate to be anyone he knew. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as Sarah's eyes widened in fear. "They've found us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're here." Without thinking, Moore grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the back door, his heart hammering in his chest. They couldn't wait. He couldn't wait. The people coming for them weren't just government agents. They were something worse. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but he knew they wouldn't stop until they got what they came for. They had already been playing a dangerous game with him, leading him to this point, giving him just enough information to make him believe he could win.
But it was all a lie.
A trap. The truth wasn't just hidden, it was weaponized, and now it was too late to turn back. As they reached the back door, Moore hesitated, his mind spinning. Should they run? Where could they even go? They had no allies left, no safe haven. The envelope in his hand felt like a weight dragging him down, but he couldn't just leave it behind. The truth was inside it, the final piece of the puzzle, the key to everything. And yet, with every passing second, Moore felt the walls closing in around him, the suffocating realization that if he didn't move now, if they didn't act fast, they would be trapped. Suddenly, the door crashed open with a deafening bang, and two figures in dark tactical gear stormed into the room, guns drawn. Moore's heart leapt into his throat as he shoved Sarah behind him, instinctively reaching for something, anything, to defend himself. But the figures didn't fire. They just stood there, cold, calculating, waiting. One of them stepped forward, lowering his weapon slightly, and Moore recognized him instantly. How? His face was grim, his eyes hardened, as if he had been pulled into something far darker than Moore could have ever imagined. "Moore, it's too late," Howe said quietly, his voice laced with regret. "You should have walked away when you had the chance. Now they're going to make sure you never speak again." The world seemed to slow down as the gravity of Howe's words hit Moore like a ton of bricks. Howe wasn't trying to help him. He was part of it, the conspiracy, the game, the people pulling the strings from the shadows. He had been using Moore, leading him down a path where the only possible outcome was his destruction. And now, with the envelope in Moore's hands, the last piece of the puzzle was within reach, but it was clear. It wasn't just about UFOs or government cover-ups anymore. This was about power, control, and keeping the darkest secrets of the world hidden, no matter the cost. Moore's mind raced, but there was no way out. There was no time for second thoughts. No room for regrets. The stakes had never been higher, and the danger had never been more real. As the door slammed shut behind him, he knew this wasn't just a fight for the truth. This was a fight for his life. The room was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, making every breath feel like ice. Moore stood at the center of it, the weight of everything pressing down on him. Howe, the man he had trusted, the man he had relied on for answers, stood across from him now, his expression unreadable, a shadow of the man Moore once believed to be an ally. The entire world felt off-kilter. Everything he thought he understood, everything he had fought for, was crumbling in an instant. The envelope in his hand felt like it was burning through his skin, the final piece of the puzzle that would reveal the truth about the Majestic 12, about the shadow government, about everything. But what good was the truth if it meant nothing in the face of the immense power that was trying to crush him? "How?" Moore said, his voice steady, but his heart racing. "This was all part of your plan, wasn't it? To lead me here, to expose everything, only for you to pull the rug out from under me at the last moment." Howe didn't respond at first. Instead, he stepped forward, his movements calculated, like a predator sizing up its prey. The two men were inches apart now, the tension thick in the air. The only sound was their breathing, slow and deliberate, as if neither one dared to move first. Moore's fingers tightened around the envelope as he fought the urge to lunge, to demand answers. "You never understood, did you, Moore?" Howe's voice was low, almost pitying. This wasn't about exposing the truth. It was about controlling it. "You've been chasing ghosts, and the only thing you've uncovered is your own demise." You thought you were uncovering the secrets of the Majestic 12, but what you've really done is dug your own grave. Moore's mind reeled, his thoughts a jumbled mess as he tried to make sense of the words. The truth? The truth had always been his goal, hadn't it? He'd followed the trail of clues. He'd uncovered the dark, twisted web of deceit that had been spun over decades, believing that if he could just get to the heart of it, everything would make sense. But Howe's words, so calmly delivered, shattered that illusion in an instant. Moore wasn't uncovering the truth. He had been manipulated all along, a pawn in a game far bigger than he had ever imagined. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. Moore stood there, frozen, as Sarah lowered the gun, her expression unreadable. Howe lay on the floor, unconscious but alive, a slight twitching at the corner of his lips hinting at something darker, something far from over. Sarah didn't speak right away. She didn't have to. The tension in the air was enough to say everything that needed to be said. Moore felt the truth settling into him like a cold hand gripping his heart. The conspiracy, the lies, the deception, it wasn't over. It was never over. They had won this battle, sure, but at what cost? He had lost his trust in the people closest to him. He had lost his innocence, the naive belief that if you dug deep enough, you'd uncover the truth and somehow, in the end, everything would make sense. He had been part of something far bigger than he ever understood, a machine that had been turning for decades, manipulating everything from the shadows. And now, with Sarah standing in front of him, the reality was clear. He was no longer just a pawn in their game. He was a survivor, but survival didn't mean peace. Not anymore. Why? Moore finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging in the air. Why did you help me all this time if you were just playing me? Sarah's eyes softened for the briefest moment, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. She took a step closer, her voice low but steady. I wasn't playing you, Moore. I was playing a game I couldn't walk away from. And I needed you to help me finish it. But why me? He asked, his confusion turning into something darker, something that felt like betrayal. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze flicking to Howe, who was starting to stir. You weren't meant to know everything. But when you started digging into the Majestic 12, you forced me to make a choice. I couldn't let you keep going. Not when it would have brought everything down. Not just for us, but for everyone. Moore's mind raced, but before he could process her words, she continued, her voice tinged with regret. You should have never gotten involved, Moore. The truth you were looking for, it's dangerous. It's bigger than just us. And now that you know, there's no going back. He could feel the weight of it all crashing down on him, the realization that everything he had thought he was uncovering was just the surface of something much darker, much more complex. There were forces in play that were beyond his comprehension, hidden hands controlling things that were far outside his control. The government, the Majestic 12, the lies. They were all just pieces of a game played on a global scale, and Moore was nothing more than a pawn in their twisted, endless game. So, what now? He asked, the question laced with resignation, as if he had already begun to accept the reality of his situation. Sarah's gaze hardened, her jaw set with determination. Now, we make sure that the game doesn't end. Because if it does, it's not just our lives on the line. The entire world would change, and not for the better. The truth we uncovered, it can't be exposed. Not yet. Not like this. Moore could see the fear in her eyes now, the same fear he had felt when he first started this journey, when he had first uncovered the clues that led him down this path. He realized then that she wasn't just protecting herself, she was protecting something far greater, something that transcended the both of them. He wanted to argue, to demand answers, but as Sarah motioned for him to follow her, the weight of the situation hit him full force. The truth, the real truth, was out there, but it wasn't something that could be shared, not yet. It was too dangerous, too volatile. The sound of sirens grew louder outside the building, a reminder that their time was running out. The conspiracy had been exposed, but the authorities were already closing in, too late to stop them, but just in time to clean up the mess. How? still groggy but slowly regaining consciousness, would be dealt with, as would the people pulling his strings. But for Moore and Sarah, the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. They left the building without looking back, the world outside seeming somehow quieter, the streets strangely empty. Moore's mind raced with questions, with doubts. He had uncovered pieces of a puzzle, but the picture it formed was far from complete. The danger was far from over. The truth had become his prison, and there was no escaping it. As they walked into the night, the weight of everything they had just uncovered hanging over them, Moore couldn't help but wonder if the truth was ever truly meant to be known. If the secrets they had uncovered were too dangerous to be set free. He had exposed a world of lies, but he had also learned that some secrets were better left buried, hidden in the shadows where they couldn't do any more harm. The story, for Moore, was far from finished. And though the world might never know the full extent of what they had uncovered, the questions would linger. Would the truth ever be exposed, or would it be buried once again, lost in the layers of secrecy that had kept it hidden for so long? For now, Moore had to live with the weight of knowing what he knew, and with the understanding that sometimes the truth was not a gift. It was a curse.